Gizautasat, aka Boss Lady Anish and Dejnikas, Anishinaabe, Bore Wadami and Dao, Citizen Band, Mang and Dodum. Hello, my friends and relatives. My name is Gizautasat, aka Boss Lady Anish. I am from Potawatomi Citizen Band, and I'm from the Loon Clan. And welcome back to Indigenous Food Friday. So here in Tennessee, I'm feeling a little bit of spring picking out through the woods and the grass and the flowers and in the air. So I wanted to do something that kind of felt like spring, even though it's not really spring ingredients. And it's also a very money-saving recipe. We've all seen the prices going up with food and gas and other goods. So I want to do a recipe that really is going to cost you little to nothing, especially if you are prepared and you grew these ingredients yourself, which is totally easy, especially if you plant the 4 sisters. You have everything you need. Now, you've all probably heard of the 3 sisters. That's very common in Native American, throughout all the tribes, Native American agriculture. But did you know there's 4 sisters? That's right. We have our squash, any kind of squash, corn or maize, hominy, beans. You know, we know all about that trio, but our 4th sister is sunflower seeds. Yes. So here's the thing. The corn provides a little bit of shade and nutrients for the beans and the squash. The beans provide shade and stalk protection for the corn and the squash, and gives back nutrients, really good nitrogen-rich nutrients back into the soil for the corn and the squash. The squash prevents weeds from coming in with those big, nice squash leaves and blossoms. It also provides shade, which helps water stay where it's supposed to stay and not dry off. The sunflowers also bring shade, protection from wind, and also brings in pollinators. So the 4 of these go great, really well together. A recent discovery I had while just doing some research, and I posted it on social media because I thought it was so interesting, that around nuclear sites like Chernobyl, Fukushima, and a couple others, the scientists have planted fields of sunflowers surrounding the site. And the reason why they do this is because, and it's been scientifically proven, that sunflowers absorb heavy metals, toxins, and radiation. I probably wouldn't eat the seeds coming from those sites, but sunflowers are amazing. So today we are going to make a dish kind of like a hot salad with all of these. Now, if you grew all these, it's going to cost you nothing except for the electricity or gas or whatever to cook it. And even if you have to buy these, you can still get beans for like 99 cents a bag. And sunflowers I don't think are that expensive, but if you haven't grown these before, you should really think about it, because it gives you full protein right here, fiber, tons of minerals and vitamins, everything that you need to stay healthy and alive. So if you haven't grown these before, I really suggest you start, especially now. So for this, I'm just using pinto beans. I've soaked these overnight, so they're ready to cook. And I started with a 1/2 cup of dry pinto beans, soaked overnight, and then I've rinsed them from that water. And then for the maize, I am using, this is White Corn Project from the Iroquois, or Haudenosaunee, and it's whole white corn. So basically it's flint corn that has been turned into hominy, basically, where you cook it in lye or ash and the skin comes off, and then you have the inside that's super, super nutritious. And then they dried it again. So I soaked this overnight, and then we're going to cook it too. I make my own hominy every year, but I wanted to do this with dried, preserved ingredients. And so if you don't have any hominy or corn or flint corn that you've made on your own, check out Iroquois white corn, and it's all by the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Nation. And they're using their traditional corn that goes back, 500 years. So that's a good one. And then I just have this cute little baby squash that has been sitting in my pantry since the fall. And this is a perfect size for this because the salad goes a long way, so you don't need a lot. This will feed, you know, 4 or 5 people, the salad, unless you have like a really hefty eater. And then I have 1 cup of, these are just shelled, not salted, not roasted or anything. It's just shelled sunflower seeds. And then, of course, those of you who know me, whenever I cook beans, I like to cook them with a twig of cedar. Doing this makes it so that you can digest the whole bean and you'll have less flatus, less gas. You will be able to absorb all the ingredients of the bean without it fermenting in your gut. I don't know why the cedar does this, but it does, and I'm very, very grateful. And something I don't have up here yet is I'm going to be garnishing, or at the end, I'm going to sprinkle it with culinary ash. You can use any kind. I've had segments on here before on how to make it. If you want to just look back on my YouTube channel or TikTok, you can find it, or it's on my blog too. I think for this one, I'm going to use sage culinary ash. And I use culinary sage for this. I don't use any sacred or ceremonial sage. This is culinary sage. And we just sprinkle a little bit of that ash on top, and it makes it so we can digest all of the corn and the beans. So everything is not wasted. Plus, I think the culinary ash adds a really cool and, I don't know, it's a really good depth of flavor. You don't want too much, of course. Just a little sprinkling on top is all you need. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so this, I'm just over like a medium-sized saucepan. It doesn't have to be big because this isn't a lot. Add your beans. Now, if you don't have pinto beans, of course, you could use any kind of bean you like. It doesn't have to be pinto beans. It could be black beans, Potawatomi beans, whatever you have. And then just fill it with enough water. Oh, I'd say 2 inches to cover. And then I'm going to add just probably, see, I just measure with my indigenous eyes, probably a teaspoon of sea salt. And then I'm going to do this twig. And of course, when you collect cedar, make sure you're doing it in the honorable way. Put down tobacco, tell the tree what you're going to be using it for, and give thanks. And introduce yourself to the tree. Okay, so I'm going to put this over on my stove, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now I've got a small saucepan. Again, I'm going to add the hulled corn. And cover it with about the same water that I did with the beans, about 2 inches covering. Add about a teaspoon of salt. And then we're going to heat this up, bring to a boil, and then turn it down so it simmers for about an hour. Just wait until it's a right tenderness that you like. I don't like the beans or the corn in this mushy, so I'll test this quite a bit and just make sure it's the right, what's the word I'm thinking? The right tender or dense that you want. I don't know what the word is right now. It'll come to me like at 3 a.m. But just make sure you check it. But it generally takes about an hour, but check on it to make sure it's the way you like it. Okay, so for this next part, I want to do a close-up so you can see. I've got a cast iron pan, and I've heated it up. And then, so this is while our corn and beans are cooking. We're going to toast our sunflower seeds. So get your cast iron pot or skillet nice and hot. Make sure it's seasoned well with oil. If you don't know how to season your cast iron, please look it up because it's really important, and you can make your cast iron last literally forever if you take proper care of it. So it's proper seasoned. You can see it's not matte at all. It's nice and glossy because the oils are in the pores. So we're going to just add this in. Stir it just a little bit. You're going to want these kind of toasted nice and brown. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of sunflower oil. It's probably, I'd say, half a tablespoon. Just measure with your eyes. You don't want too much, of course. So always try a little bit first, and then you can always add more later. then I'm going to add a generous pinch of salt, which is probably a teaspoon. Not a teaspoon. I'm sure it's like a half a teaspoon. Not a full teaspoon. And you can see it's already turning nice and golden. Smells so good. You know, I'm so ready for spring, but we didn't really seem, our winters are just getting awfully weird, aren't they? Short and warmer. So because of that, on that note, I really encourage you all to be growing your own food. And doing it at this point means that you're not really having to do like out of life or death that you're going to starve. But at least you'll be learning along the way and teaching your children, if you have kids or grandkids or you're an auntie or uncle, you can be teaching them how to provide for themselves when they're on their own. So it's great. Okay, these are nice and toasted now. Just beautiful. So I'm going to set these aside. So now I'm just going to set the sunflowers, the toasted sunflower seeds. I'm going to pour them out on some paper towels. And if you don't have paper towels, that's totally fine. You can use a clean kitchen towel or a sieve. Like if you have a fine mesh sieve, that works fine too. I get paper towels that are made from bamboo, so they're sustainable, not made from trees. Okay, and then we're just going to let those cool and kind of rinse off, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now while our beans and corn are cooking, we're going to get to our little baby squash. And again, you can use any kind of squash like this. It doesn't have to be butternut. It can be delicate, acorn, winter squash, whatever you have. My husband's favorite squash is butternut, so we use this a lot. And it's just a really good multi-purpose squash. So for this, we're going to need to skin it too. So I'm just going to cut the top off, and then we are going to peel it. Okay, so now we've got this beautiful little squash all skinned. Now I feed all of the stuff that I don't use to my chickens. You can also feed it to the birds or put it in your compost so that you're not wasting anything. So now I'm just going to cut this in half. Tough little squash. You can just see how adorable it is. And then I'm going to clean out where the seeds are. Now, I'm not keeping these seeds because I've already kept as many as I can for the next 2 years. I always try to keep at a minimum 2 years worth of seeds on hand, and I have plenty of butternut squash seeds. Okay, then you're just gonna cut this into bite-sized pieces. Now, if you have dried squash, you can always use your dried squash. If you haven't seen that episode, it's on my YouTube, my blog, and TikTok on how to dry squash. And you can use that too. You're just going to need to reconstitute it like you are the rice and the beans. I still had this little baby squash in my pantry and it needed to be used. So that's what I'm using, and that's really what food sovereignty is about, being able to provide for you and your family in a sustainable way. So use what you have. But this little baby squash definitely needed to get used. Okay, so now we'll just put this aside in a bowl. And our beans and corn have about another half hour to go. So while you're waiting for that, you can prepare your other dishes that you have going with the meal, or you can relax, you can do laundry, go read a book. But don't forget to keep checking on your beans and corn to make sure it's the right density. That's the word I was waiting for, density. So you're going to want to keep checking to make sure it's the density and the texture that you want. So I'm going to do that, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so my beans and corn are about 5 to 10 minutes away from being done. So in a medium-sized to large skillet, I'm gonna, on high heat, I'm gonna add, that's probably about a tablespoon of sunflower oil. We're gonna get that heated up and all around the pan. That's pretty much warmed up, and I've coated the whole bottom of the pan, and I'm going to carefully put in all of that squash. And then I'm going to coat every piece in the oil, just so that each side is pretty much oiled up. That's perfect. And then I'm going to add a sprinkle of salt. Just use your judgment, you know. I know I should measure more, but it always varies because of different sizes of squash or the type of salt you use. I like to use really coarse, either kosher salt or sea salt. So my measurements are going to be a little bit different unless if you're using iodized salt. So get to know your palate and your dishes and your fingers and hands. Like our grandmas, this is what they did, and this is how I learned. So this is how I teach. So there you go. So it's about, I did about two sprinkles of sea salt, and just mix that up really well. And then I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water, just enough to kind of coat the bottom. So that was probably just like 2 or 3 tablespoons of water. And then we're going to let this, as soon as it comes to a boil and really starts to sizzle, then we're going to turn the heat down, cover, and let it cook for about 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, so now you can see it's boiling really well, the water that's in there, making all good sounds. So now I'm just going to cover it, turn the heat down just to about medium heat. We're going to cook this for about 7 to 10 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes. It totally depends. I know I'm all over the place with the time, but it really kind of depends on, number one, the squash you're using, and number two, how you like it. I like mine in this dish, I like it firm. So I'm not going to cook it as long, but you might like your squash a little bit more soft. So you're going to cook yours longer. So I would start at 5 minutes, check it, see if it's how you like it. If so, stop and go to the next step. If you still want it softer, keep cooking until it's the density that you like. So for this, I'm going to go for 5 minutes. I'm going to check it, and then I'll probably go for a couple more minutes and then check it again. So I'll meet you back here in 5. Okay, here we are at 5 minutes. Oh, look at that gorgeous color. And then I'm just going to test one by pushing on it. Ooh, that's pretty firm, but not too bad. I can still cut through it. So I'm just going to go probably just, actually, I think this is perfect. I'm stopping at 5 minutes on this one. But you see how this is how you need to check it. Don't just walk away and start reading a book because you might come back to some mush. So I'm going to remove this from the heat, and we'll go to the next step. Okay, so I've drained both the beans and the corn, and also the squash, just to for the squash, just to remove any excess liquid. So now, over high heat, I'm going to add another tablespoon of sunflower oil. We're going to let that heat up a little bit, just like we did before. And then we're going to add our beans and our hulled corn. And we're going to get this sizzling. And again, you want to get everything coated with the oil. And then we're going to add our beautiful squash. And stir that in. How beautiful that looks. I mean, you can tell how all of these go so incredibly well together. Now I'm going to add some salt. And that's about 4 of my hand pinches. And then some ground black pepper. If you like heat in your food too, you can also add some cayenne. Okay, and we're going to stir that all in. Oh, it's looking and smelling amazing. I can't wait for y'all to try this. Now, here's a special ingredient. If you don't have this ingredient, that's okay. You can just omit it, or you can use apple cider vinegar instead. But if you have maple vinegar, use it for this. If you don't have maple vinegar, get some or make some. If you tap maple trees, you can also be making maple vinegar. And I use this for everything. If a recipe calls for apple cider vinegar, I usually will go to maple vinegar instead, especially if it's an indigenous recipe. So I am just going to add two spoonfuls of the vinegar. And it's going to help bring all the flavors out, as well as really like marry them all together. Oh my gosh, it smells so amazing. We'll get that all incorporated and married together. And now it's time for our dear fourth sister, our toasted sunflowers. So we'll go ahead and sprinkle that all in and welcome the sunflowers to the sisterhood. Of course, I'm making a mess. That's what I do. And just look how perfect this is. You're going to have all of the different textures, but then the crunch of the sunflower, and then the tanginess of the maple vinegar. It's just perfect. All right, and it's done. Let's dish up. Okay, so now we're just going to dish up. And look how beautiful all those colors are. I mean, look how beautiful that looks and smells. So now I'm going to put in our culinary ash. I keep all my culinary ash after I make it in just these cute little mason jars. I don't even remember where I got them. I actually may have got them from a yard sale or something. And then I just use this little tiny mesh tea sifter. I put in a little bit of the ash, not much, and then just tap it against my finger. That way you're not getting too much and you're not getting like any chunky, crunchy bits. See, that's perfect. That's the perfect amount. There you are. And that was it. Super easy. And you can see, like, if you like soak your beans and corn or squash, if that's the way you're using it, overnight, how simple it is to just assemble this really quick. And it makes a perfect lunch dish or a side dish for dinner, or just, you know, for a healthy snack. So here you are. And until next time, bon appetit.